it's something like 40 to 70% of companies at market listed for sale don't actually sell. All right. And so if a business is on biz buy sell, it's where it goes to die. All right. Like there's a lot, all the stuff that's never going to sell is there. And because we're all the average of the five people around us, every business listing is the average of the five listings around it.
Walker, you're very, very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Brendan, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise. Look, we have been chatting off air, having a great time off air. You know, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Walker, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Wow. Okay. Brendan, you're coming in like hard with the values right off the bat. Okay. I thought it was going to be like, okay. So scaling, say it again, scaling with purpose. Is
Scaling
that right?
with purpose.
Okay. You know what? I want to relate this to my work. All right. So I'm sort of known for acquisition entrepreneurship and buying existing companies and all the rest of it. Right. And the thing is that what most people get wrong, like sort of like 101, right? Is people are always looking at this external business that they're looking at acquiring and looking at it as if it exists without them. But the truth is that the minute after acquisition, you're like cutting the head off of that animal. And then you as the new owner are becoming the head and the brain and the leader of this machine, right? Nothing like businesses are not real estate. They take spirit, they take vision, they take effort, and they take purpose. Okay. And so the thing is that like what people get wrong is they try to figure out what is a good business when in fact you need to reverse the question and say, what do you bring to the table as the CEO, as the owner of this company? Okay. Because that's going to be the little thing that makes the big difference, that makes your company, that company that you're looking at, exceptional. Right. So scaling with purpose to me is sort of like living the most elevated life possible. When you go to work every day, when your work is an extension of what it is that you love doing, it's not work. It's retirement, right? And so some people call me a workaholic, but I just say I'm really passionate.
I can see that. That is a wonderful response to that question. After 160 episodes of ScaleX Insider, I've never had that infused spirit, vision, and effort because ultimately the business is an expression, it's an extension of you. So I
Yeah.
love that. I can't get past the fact, whenever I was researching you, and we're going to come to your incredible book, Buy Then
Oh,
Build.
thank
For
you.
those who are listening, you won't be able to see Walker's book, Buy Then Build. I encourage you all to go out and grab a copy. How Acquisition Entrepreneurs Outsmart the Startup Game. I fact checked your bio because it said you're an Emmy nominated film producer, which really isn't congruent with somebody who specializes in acquisitions for small to medium sized enterprises. Look, I can't go past this. Tell me a little bit more about that before we get
Yeah.
into the meat of today.
Yeah. Okay. Brendan, thank you. So basically, yeah, it seems like they're very, very different, right? But here's the truth. Here's the truth. Um, I've been inside probably 100 transactions. Like I've bought, 10 companies myself. I've had my own exits. I work as an M&A advisor because it started out because I just got really good at transactions, but it was also like I wanted statistically significant experience in deals that weren't mine, right? And the truth is that like buying and selling companies, if you're just on that transaction part, right? We think about it in terms of companies, but in the film industry, it's essentially what an executive producer is doing. So an executive producer invests in the film, they raise money around the film, okay? They make sure that they don't really have a lot of creative influence other than they're sort of like on the producer team, but like we really sort of depend on the producer, the director, the cinematographer to create the film, and we just kind of keep the rails on and pay attention to the budget, right? And then we get the film sold. Okay, so it's sort of like it's all about raising capital into films or television and then exiting that film at the same time. We had a number. So the first well, I need to fast forward to sort of 2.0. The first film in my 2.0 career as a film producer was called Print the Legend. It was the second ever Netflix original. And this was in 2013, right? And when I was in college, we sold a film, The Lionsgate, sort of whatever. But the point is like, we sold this film and I was like, wait, I've seen this before. And do you remember like the long tail, like when the internet came out and it was like all the little search terms? When I saw the streamers coming online and then we ended up selling this little quirky documentary to them, it was like, I've seen this before. Let's go. And we did maybe 10 or a dozen, of these smaller documentaries. And you can work with like the best filmmakers in the world in the documentary segment and make a film for like $500,000, $750,000, right? And then you would sell it to these streamers because they had this insatiable demand. Now, there was a change in the space in about 2018. We had a movie called Wrestle, and Wrestle was, one of the best films I ever had the opportunity to work on. It was, prior to this, Print the Legend was in, South by Southwest. It won one of three awards and sold to Netflix, right? Finders Keepers was in competition for best documentary film at Sundance, like all these things, right? Like all these Sundance denied Wrestle, South by denied Wrestle, Tribeca denied Wrestle, Toronto denied Wrestle, and I'm just like, okay, there's been a change. Like supply and demand have changed. This is the best movie in 5 years we've worked on. I don't get it. We ended up selling it to PBS. And because it was on television and not a film, we were nominated for an Emmy. That's how good the movie was. But
What
the
a
thing is, I've got a film in production right now with a bunch of A-list actors. It hasn't formally been announced, so I can't talk about it. I've got a TV show at Netflix that is in the final stages. It looks like before being greenlit, and a couple other things in the works. And so there's been a shift in the types of projects I've been working on because I'm always looking at supply and demand and like where is the demand for films to buy, because those are the ones that you want to raise money around and get sold. So it's the same thing. It's just doing transactions. The company just looks like a film. That's it.
That's incredible. I would never have put the two together.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in your story that
Can I give it to you like this? I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. I see the idea forming, but I want to outline this so that people get it. Like in a business, right? You've got like the entrepreneur, right? You have like the investor or the venture capitalist, right? And then you have the or the private equity guy, and then you've got the craftsman. Okay? In a film, the producer is the entrepreneur. The executive producer is that private equity, venture capital investor person. Okay. And then the craftsman is really the director. Right. And so it's one of these where it's like being in the film industry is so fun. Like I was just at T Street out in LA last week. And what, what the guy that runs T Street, he said to me, he's like, what the best part about being a producer is? I'm like, what? And he said, well, when everything goes right, the producer did a great job. And when everything goes wrong, it's the director's fault. And it's not that different in entrepreneurship, right? It's like when everything goes great, we're going to put that entrepreneur right on the front cover of, Inc. magazine or, whatever the Irish equivalent is. And when things sort of go wrong, it's like, oh, my developer screwed up the code or whatever it is.
Uh, that resonates. So, acquisition entrepreneurship, for those hearing that term for the first time,
Yeah.
what is it?
Sure. So it's basically, look, we've all heard of, like tech entrepreneurs, real estate entrepreneurs, even like gig economy, like gig entrepreneurs, like how, internet entrepreneurs, all the rest of it. And, ultimately it was one of these where, back in 2004, when I was graduating with my MBA and my first real startup attempt just like went up in flames, I was walking around, White Boulevard here in St. Louis. And it's one of these where, this was turn of the millennium, and like I just come from the Bay Area, and I was in this entrepreneurship program, and there was, we were doing this, accelerator program with the startup and all the rest of it. Everyone was trying to be Silicon Valley. Everyone was teaching us like, hey, make these like swing for the fences startups and go raise capital from venture capitalists and just like go for the home run, right? And Moneyball hadn't come out yet, if you know that movie. But I was
I
just like,
do.
there's a different game here. It's sort of like, how come we're all trying to hit it out of the park, right? And when you actually look at the success rate of these, startups, we all know they're very small, but we do it because we think we're special, right? But the truth is when you get in there and you try to start a business, all of us realize it's really all about, you want to build a company that has revenue that exceeds the cost that it takes to operate. In other words, cash flow positive, right? And if you're not cash flow positive, you're not sustainable and you don't actually have a business, right? So to me, I was like, well, how, like I was walking up and down Wydown and I'm looking around, I'm like, look, this is like we're bordering one of the top 10 richest neighborhoods in the country. No one in St. Louis, Missouri is an internet entrepreneur like in, 20 years ago. Like I would walk up and down and just be like, so I met a guy who owned like a light company, like light fixtures and like, and these are big like Home Alone style houses, right? And I'm like, okay, there's got to be a way to like buy one of these companies. Like, why am I trying to be Silicon Valley in St. Louis, Missouri? It doesn't make any sense. Like, what are we known for? Like, what's this stuff? I mean, this like St. Louis is older than the country. Like, why am I trying to be California? So, I ended up buying a book printing company and then ultimately like a distribution company and ultimately, a promotional items company. And then I bought a manufacturing company and then I bought a metal finishing company and then I bought an e-commerce company that sells toilets online and just like all of these things that sort of are like leaning into the geography in which I'm at, right? Like you want to get into film, move to Hollywood, right? You want to get into VC backed entrepreneurship, move to Silicon Valley, right? If you live in St. Louis, buy a printing company, like it doesn't need to be sexy to cash flow, right? And so I knew there was a way to acquire a business and sort of start with revenue and earnings first. So I sort of came up with this concept of acquisition entrepreneur, right? Which is sort of like entrepreneurship does not need to be defined as starting from scratch. And I got a lot of pushback from this, as you could imagine, 10 years ago. And I was like, well, in retrospect, I wish I'd had these words then, which is it's sort of like defining real estate investing as ground up only and like ignoring buying existing buildings, like which is the cornerstone of real estate investing, right? It's like no, let's build from scratch, like all skyscrapers all the time from flat ground. Like that's a terrible idea. So
It's
we've been ignoring this whole segment of entrepreneurship and what it means. And then of course we have this in the States anyway, we've got, $10 trillion of business value switching hands from retiring baby boomers. They own more companies than any other generation in the history of mankind. And it's like 43% of the US economy needs to like retire by the end of the decade. So there's this huge like transfer of infrastructure. Forget the wealth part. Like just think about the infrastructure. It's massive. And so it's just sort of like, well, if we can think about this term, acquisition entrepreneur and embrace it and just say, like, look, it doesn't need to be sexy and flashy, and I don't need to give away all of my equity and like beg people to invest in the company so I can make payroll. I can go get a bank loan. I can own the whole thing with like a cash infusion that's similar to that of a down payment of a house. And then I can get on base, right? With revenue, earnings, infrastructure, talent, customers, and then slowly build the company that I wish I had started, right?
it is so obvious when you describe it like this. So for our small to medium sized business owners, founders, leaders listening to this,
Yeah.
and especially in this side of the world, the acquisition experience is a lot less, the acquisition competence, the acquisition landscape is a lot less than what you would typically see in the US.
Yeah.
The
Maybe.
the advantage, well, we're going to hopefully change that. The in the context of scaling and scaling with purpose, you cited the main advantage here as skipping the startup phase, which is incredibly challenging. I think you quoted a stat in your book of something like less than 4% of startups ever make it to $1 million. God knows how many ever make it to 10 million. And just to share another stat, less than 1% of small to medium sized enterprises are actually achieving scale. So I see
Yes. Right.
this as supporting those leaders in their ambition to scale. Say you've mentioned skipping that startup phase as a real advantage of acquisition entrepreneurship. What are the other advantages in the context of scaling with purpose?
I think that, you know, okay, if we're going that way, I would say, whenever I would first talk about this, okay, we're talking to entrepreneurs. So let me say it like this. I think that there's one way to do it if you don't have a business and you're going out and trying to acquire your first company, right? And I call it the three A's, right? It's like attitude, aptitude, and action, right? And it's just paying attention to, do you have the right mindset? Do you have the ability, do you have the ability to actually be an entrepreneur? What are you good at? What do you bring to the table? Where do you excel? And then what do you want to spend your time doing, right? And like when I was, before I started having all these girls, I have three girls, but like, before I was like, Missouri state champion in like road cycling, right? Like it was just like this random, like I would just like crush road bikes and it was one of these where I was like, maybe I should buy a bike shop because I do it all, like all of us have these hobbies and it's like, oh, like I want to, but the truth is all of the times that you're out riding your bike are like after work and weekends. And so what would you be doing at the bike shop? You'd be like working on bikes and manning the store and like you'd be putting on the races but not racing in them. And it's just like you have to look at how do you want to pay attention to your time. In the States, there's a lot of like, business developments where business parks where the only like it's like big warehouses and like the only place to eat is like a McDonald's that's like attached to a gas station and like if you're good with that like do it, but other people are like that's not me, like I need to be urban, I need to be like I need to work out of my basement or whatever it is, and so you need an internet business or whatever it is, like you need to figure out how you want to spend your time. For existing entrepreneurs that already own a company, okay, especially if it's cash flowing well already, the opportunity to scale through acquisition is, um, I'll just say, equally as important as growing organically. And I think that if your business is not growing at a rate of 20% year over year, you need to be at least looking at acquisitions, okay? Because that's going to be the little thing that makes the big difference if you're in a slower growing kind of industry. So in that instance, where an entrepreneur already has a business, what I want those people to do is look at what is the core competency of their business right now. Every time I own a company, I try to figure out what's the one metric that I like if I just focus on this one metric makes the whole business kind of, drive, right? And so it's like when you have a company, you already know what your core competency is. You know what the spirit of the company is. You know what your purpose is, right? And so after you figure out what your core competency is, you then, in my opinion, would turn to like industry trends because you've got to be plugged in and staying in front of where the demand is going, right? So again, it's all about that capturing that supply and demand imbalance, right? Once you figure that out, you're going to be able to identify your strategic direction as a company, all right? And once you have that strategic direction as a company, aligned with the industry trends and your core competency, you can then discern quickly what your desired infrastructure is. So, is it an acquihire? Is there equipment you don't have? Is there a geography region you need to expand to? Like usually businesses will tell you what they need to scale, right? And then once you figure out that desired infrastructure, it's pretty easy to back into, the size of the acquisition based on the size of your company, right? And then any geography or any other sort of, peripheral decisions that need to be made. And so so in terms of scaling through purpose, which was your question, I think that like if you're aligning the business you have with you as a leader, and then you're aligning the growing through acquisition, those future acquisitions with the spirit of the company, that's kind of the little thing that will, I think, align the purpose with the acquisitions as you're growing. How was that?
Really good. And actually, you hit on what is technically scaling, average annualized growth of 20% year on year on either revenue or employees. So,
Yeah,
you've hit the nail on the head there. I just want to come back to what you termed the law of three. You've mentioned
yeah,
attitude. The other two you talked about was aptitude and action. And I love the
yeah,
fact, and again, I was surprised to read this in a book about acquisitions, that you start with the most important consideration whenever we're planning to acquire a company is actually how we think.
yeah.
Just dive into that a little bit further, covering the other two, or aptitude and
Yeah.
action.
Yeah, I think okay, so this all started because the first time I started talking about acquisitions, right? And acquisition entrepreneurship, I started a lot with, MBA classrooms. And I would go in and I would just start talking about kind of what I was doing. And, inevitably someone would sort of stand up and just be like, yeah, but how do I know if I can even do this? And it became obvious to me that it was like the more fundamental question. And I think that like I'm, I don't know what school's like in Ireland, but I can guess, right? And in the United States, it's pretty like it's an academic version of here's the hoop, put the ball in the hoop. Like just put it's very organized. We've already made all these decisions. Like you just need to like, regurgitate this and check these boxes and whatever. And, then they talk about, the real world and like moving into like actual careers and stuff. And like early careers usually are pretty defined. Like often at bigger institutions, there's even career paths sometimes outlined, right? Like I remember like my cousin got a job after school and after college, and it was like he showed me this piece of paper that had exactly the pay increases for like, what he had to do every year for like the next 30 years. It was outlined. And I was like, wow. But I think that once you own a company, okay? If you own a business that's already moving, all right, that's one thing. Let me talk about starting from scratch just to create a more dramatic example, and then we'll move into it. When you start from scratch, right? Like ironically, I ended up starting Acquisition Lab for people who wanted to learn how to buy businesses, which was the single first time I created a successful seven-figure
Startup.
startup company. Yeah. So yeah, we just kicked off cohort 48 last night.
Oh, well
We
done,
teach you,
you.
yeah, it's great. But anyway, the point is like every month I'm like, am I doing the right business model? Like every decision is like is it creates the whole box in terms of the playground, right? When you buy an existing company, usually that product market fit is already determined, the business model is already determined, and like you're sort of like running the ball, right? But here's the truth is that there is an inevitable um, level of chaos that exists um, that does not exist in my experience in school, right? Or in sports or in, jobs at corporate, environments. Like it's sort of like all of the decisions that need to be made. Okay, so just jumping back to Print the Legend for a second, when it opens, okay, it's sort of like the iconoclastic investor, Brad Feld, and his voice is coming over, and he's like, when you're a leader, when you're an entrepreneur, every day something comes up and smacks you in the face, right? And it's true. And it's like I'm look, man, I'm just trying to put the ball in the hoop, right? But it's like there's all of these things going on, and the truth is like chaos ensues. A key a key employee leaves you. Sometimes if you're like me, 40% of your entire workforce quits in a single day. Sometimes your largest customer is holding you over a barrel. Sometimes your whatever the problem is. Like sometimes cash is like, how am I gonna pay payroll this week? I mean, it's just like all these things and like all these problems that I think I hesitate to use this word, but normal people like just don't face, right? And so you have to like I really embraced Carol Dweck's version of the growth mindset, right? And the growth mindset means it's just the opposition of fixed mindset. It's like all decisions are fixed. You are, smart or dumb. This is a good business or a bad business, and all these sorts of things. And you start to figure out like life is really, really malleable and life is completely made up, right? And like everything from like what someone gets paid to, what features and benefits this item has to, like which podcast should you be on, like all of these things is just kind of like it's all malleable. And you have to know that like when you're in this job, okay, you're going to be faced with challenges that I haven't seen emerge anywhere else, and they all seem like they can like cripple you or cripple your business or like just like knock you out. And I think the thing is you have to understand that you are the right person for this job and that you can figure it out, right? And a lot of it just comes down to your raw desire, right, or drive in order to do it, and figuring out what motivates you, right? So if you're like if you're like me, you've done, like 100 personality assessments trying to understand yourself and just looking for consistencies. I know a few things about myself. One, I'm really, really driven. Two, I have pretty decent interpersonal skills. And three, I'm very financially motivated. So like I like to go get the reward, right? I like to go after and get that thing. And I personally am willing to do whatever it takes, right? Just simply knowing that about myself helps me get to that growth mindset and knowing like what it is I'm trying to do and be able to make those decisions and create those structures or do that thing where you just have to, what's the quote? Like in the Coliseum, it's the people with the dirt on their face and the blood on their hands or whatever it is. And like it's like that's what this game is. You're in the Coliseum and there's something coming out and you're the person to tackle it.
I love that. And this season opened up with a wonderful episode with Rob Dial, the mindset mentor. We talk about mindset a lot. The very first principle of our 10 principle Scale X framework in the context of scaling is actually psyche. It either empowers or disempowers your scaling ambition. And what I'm hearing from you is very, very consistent and very aligned. And I want to circle back at the end to mindset, because I noticed through this influences from Bruce Lee and Wayne Dyer, people that I absolutely revere and have heavily influenced me as well, and actually we reference in our own work. So,
I think let me just throw this in there. I think it's one of these things where, mindset is so fundamental that it's easy to overlook. And I think a lot of people don't I think a lot of people don't value it. And they're like, yeah, 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 yeah. What's the thing? Like, what do I do? And it's like, well, the minute you're actually in it, you start to realize like, oh my gosh, mindset is actually more important than these other things. And so it's easy to skip over because it's that sort of like qualitative soft stuff. But at the same time, it's actually, you know, the difference between being a Navy SEAL and not being a Navy SEAL.
completely agree.
Is there an Irish, what's the Irish Navy
We're not
SEAL?
we're not as testosterone charged, if that's such a word. We've got the guards here, and it's all very colloquial and high fives, and we're all very relaxed.
See,
We're lovers, not fighters.
I knew I was an
Walker.
Irishman. I knew I was an Irishman.
We if there's stuff kicking off, we hug it out. We hug it out. If of course Conor McGregor isn't available to sort it out for us, we'll just hug it out. So, um, for those listening who are saying, "Yeah, that's great, guys. I'm hearing what you're saying. Yeah, let's get at the acquisitions, and it's largely dependent on your mindset. But look, how on earth, as a small to medium-sized business, can I afford to acquire a company?" Like you said right at the outset, the criteria that you apply when acquiring a business, Walker, generating positive cash flows, revenue earning, they're way past the product market fit challenge that
Yep.
startups face. They're profitable. Surely these businesses are outside of our scope of possibility in terms of acquiring those kind of businesses. Can you speak to the affordability challenge as our listeners might perceive that?
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know Irish infrastructure, right? I don't know what Ireland is doing right now. What I do know is I've bought 10 companies in the United States. Okay. And so what happened was specifically in 2016, all right, the Small Business Administration tweaked their loan program so that entrepreneurs could buy existing companies. They don't even have to be entrepreneurs anyone, okay, that's an American citizen buying an American company, okay, can get up to $5 million, all right, as a bank loan with zero collateral. All right. But they had to put down 10% cash infusion, which meant 90% of a loan up to $5 million was what the SBA was offering. Okay. Now you had to sign a personal guarantee. You still have to sign a personal guarantee today. They've tweaked it again last year, where now there's certain things where you can put down as little as 5% if you can get the seller to stay on to a certain component. I don't push that as like a strategy. I think that if you get there, once you're out in the game, great. But like if you need that to happen in order to succeed, you're handicapping yourself at the beginning, right? So it's like but that's a different topic, different podcast. But the point is like you can put down the point is you can put down in the United States a very, very small amount, right, to buy something significantly larger. Okay. Um, Now assuming it's a one times revenue valuation, which may or may not be true, just as assumption. If I put $500,000 in and I get $5 million, you're talking about a company that's doing, 5.5 million in annual revenue. In Ireland, do you call it turnover? Is that
Yeah,
turnover?
both we
Yeah.
use interchangeably, sales, revenue, or
Okay.
turnover. Yeah.
Okay, so it's 5.5 million, and then in that instance, you're in a position where you're in the top 0.5% largest companies in the country, right? So if you are buying a company that's doing $1 million in revenue, you already covered this, but it's like 10% of startups kind of make it, but out of the 10%, only 4% exceed $1 million in revenue. So when I first got out of my MBA program, like, what do you mean like $1 million? Like that is so small, I can't even like pay attention to it. Like that's ridiculous. And then I realized it's really a really low bar to have such an exceptional right performance, right, and it's very, very affordable because if you use the same math that we just worked a minute ago, you're talking about like $100,000 would get you $1 million as a loan. Sorry, $100,000 would get you $900,000 as a loan. That's your $1 million acquisition right there, right? So when I look back at the majority of companies that I bought, I ended up putting in somewhere between 200,000 and 250,000, just like on average, with as like a 12 to 15% cash infusion, and then the rest of it was a bank loan, right? And so I was just like, I just did that 8 times over, right, for the last 20 years, and that's my big secret. That's what I did.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
love that, and you've been really transparent with that. Something that really struck me reading your book, having recruited hundreds of salespeople over the course of a 25-year career,
Yeah.
and knowing how challenging it is to attract, to train, to high performing salespeople into a business. It is so, so challenging. And I never contemplated what you share in the book, which is if you
Hmm.
set out to or you set out to hire a salesperson who can deliver you $4 million of revenue, what would you pay for that person?
Right.
And the probability of hiring somebody who can deliver on that, like, is so, so slim. But you approach this with a different lens, which I loved. You know what I'm referring to in the book, Walker? Do you want to share that example? Because ultimately, what you said, you can go out and acquire $4 million worth of revenue,
Right.
get the already proven
Salespeople in there.
salespeople that are in there for what it
A
actually
fraction.
costs to
Yeah.
hire a really high performing salesperson. I was like, oh my God, it was like the penny dropping.
Yeah.
Just share the
Great.
backdrop of this.
Great. Well, what I'll do is this, like, let me share how I got to this conclusion, which was, again, the first company I bought was a book printing company, right? Now, going back to that growth mindset, I bought this book printing company, and then, about a year later, Amazon released the Kindle, and about 6 months after that, you know, Steve Jobs introduced the iPad. All the bookstores were going out of business at this time. Newspapers were going out of business at this time. The Great Recession was on, right? Like business wasn't awesome. It was not good. Like I laid off maybe 10% of my workforce. We furloughed. I mean, I was giving talks, like I was giving all hands meetings to my whole team saying things like, listen, I believe in this company because I believe in the United States of America. Like it sounds ridiculous right now, but I mean, that's how dark it was, right? I mean, it was hard, right? But I bought it. There was three reasons why I bought that company. And one of them was because I saw big trends happening in that space, which is for the first time since Gutenberg, printing equipment was changing. And so I actually had installed a bunch of digital book printing equipment, which we then sold to existing customers, which then is what actually kept us flat throughout the whole Great Recession. And I remember my banker, I met with him every quarter and he'd like buy me a steak sandwich. Okay. And and I'd meet with him and I slid my financials across the table And he looked at it and he looked at me and said, "Hey, flat's the new growth model." And he threw his head back and laughed. And I was like, "Great, he's happy. I'm good." But anyway, sorry. What was what was the question? I can't remember. Oh, the salesperson. So during this time, okay, there was 36 printing companies a week going out of business. Okay. It was tough. So I decided I was going to hire existing salespeople from other printing companies. And I was gonna, what's the plan here? You already know where I'm going with this. I'm gonna hire the salespeople, and then all the customers are gonna come with them. All right. So I did that maybe two, three times, and I realized over the course of, the 3 years that I was doing this strategy that I was lucky if like two of the customers followed the sales rep, right? And I started to do research, and I have no idea the source of this information here 15 years later or whatever. But like what I found out around 2009 was that everyone thinks that business follows the salespeople, but actually it stays with the company because customers of a company are I won't use the word loyal, but they know that whatever mechanism is going on in the company is the thing that's actually working for them. And by following the sales rep, they're taking a risk. Sure, they like them. That's like the relationship, right? But the thing is like they're not necessarily going to move their business. It's a small percentage. So what I realized was, well, okay, if I go out and buy these printing companies, then like I don't need to hire the salespeople. And keep in mind, these were, top-notch salespeople. So in those days, I was paying, if I got a cheap one, it was like $65,000 plus commissions, right? But it was more like it was closer to 100,000 base, right? So, here I am paying, let's just round up to 100,000, okay, times three, four different sales reps that I hired. And then I realized, like, why didn't I just buy their whole company? Like once I figured out once I figured out the debt model, I was like, I could just buy their company and then I would have the equity build up. My company is cash flowing. So like I don't necessarily need more cash flow from that business. So like during that time, printing companies were selling for, 2.5 times. So you're talking about like I was gonna pay off the entire loan in like 2.5 years. You see what I'm saying? Like it was just like this is crazy. Like I can get the sales rep, I can get all their accounts, I can get their brand, I can get their loyal customers, I can get their infrastructure, I can get, if they had a different piece of equipment that did, like I did 8.5 by 11, if they did 6 by 9 or 7 by 10 or whatever it was, like you would pick that up and then you just sell off what you don't need and whatever. So that's what then started my, growth through acquisition strategy at the printing company.
Yeah,
Was that
just
insight?
I
Yeah.
just thought it was absolutely brilliant. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times the mechanism by which companies are valued. Every founder, every entrepreneur wants to know the value of their business.
Mhm.
You've spoken about 1x revenue, 2.5x EBITDA. Let's just speak to valuations for a moment. I know it's
Yeah.
it's not just as black and white as we
Yeah.
can
Yep.
get into in this podcast, but
Hmm.
broadly, for those now considering that, yeah, I've got a growth mindset. I'm really keen to scale through acquisition. I'm very, very curious to explore what is out there. I feel that I can. We'll come to kind of leveraging debt in a moment because in this part of the world, banks are um, a lot less entrepreneurial. Let's say they're much more risk averse. We'll speak to private equity and leveraging private equity when it comes to the capital to purchase these companies. But let's
Yep.
just speak to valuations for a moment in terms of what broadly would I
Yeah.
expect to pay.
Yeah. So, Brendan, it's gonna look, there's a few different major criteria. The first is what is the size of the business we're looking at, right? And, you know, the if I'm gonna buy a printing company outside St. Louis, Missouri, doing $1.5 million in revenue, it's a very, very different valuation than if I'm trying to buy Apple, right? We can agree on that, right? Like the
Absolutely.
size is very different, right? So size is number one,
We all
okay?
get that one.
Size matters, Brendan. But it's one of these things where, if I'm looking at, so let's just define it and then I can speak to it. So if we just define it as like, hey, we're going to roll with what Walker's talking about, sub $25 million acquisition. Let's like really focus it on, a $1 to $5 million acquisition. I think most companies in the world would see a, 10 or 20% or more growth if they bought a $1 to $5 million business. So let's just talk about that. Now, from there, you have to be, it's sort of like what's your confidence level, right? So if I'm like 99% confident, I would tell you it's probably a 2 times earnings to a 5.5 times earnings, right? If I shrink that in and say I'm, I don't know, 80% confident, it's going to be closer to like like basically a 3 to 5 times earnings. Okay.
And how are you defining earnings?
How are you defining earnings? So there's adjusted EBITDA, there's EBITDA, and there's seller's discretionary earnings. They're all different. In this space, it's most common to have seller discretionary earnings. And what that means is it looks at an owner operator, okay, as the buyer. And so it says like everything that's being used to pay the salary of the owner, all of the perks that the owner is getting, all of the principal and interest payments that the owner may or may not make, okay, is all added back into this. You take that EBITDA number and then you add back with just what's called add backs, and you ultimately get to a seller's discretionary earnings, which means, hey, what is the economic cash flow of the owner of this black box, right? And of course, it's a recent number, right? Very often it would be either the trailing 12 months, the prior calendar year, or like a weighted average of the last 3 years, right? So there's some kind of like earning, depending on your industry. So, but ultimately, what you're trying to figure out is what is the total cash flow that this black box generates, and then you're going to multiply that by, let's just call it 3.5, right? So that's essentially what you're looking at. And then there's usually working capital, which is, accounts receivable, accounts payables, inventory that may or may not be added to that number depending on a number of factors.
Okay, so we have broadly given our listeners an insight as to how they might potentially value this
Yeah.
company if they're starting to look at companies with a certain kind of level of revenue. Where do they where do they source these companies? Where,
Yeah.
what is there an equivalent of the kind of the yellow pages where you go in, which is here, you opened up and you've got this listing of all of these companies for sale.
Yeah.
It's or how can we be really clever about this in terms of
Yeah.
actually sourcing the best deals that are out there?
Yep. Okay. So, couple of things. One, a lot of people borrow lessons from real estate and try to apply them to business acquisitions, and it's wrong. Okay. So a lot of them are like, look, all day long is off market listings. That's what I want. Just things off market because sellers are dumb and I'm going to be able to take advantage of them. And like, I make money when I buy. Okay. In business acquisitions, I believe the opposite. You make money when you sell. Okay. You make money with the equity buildup. You make money with the build. This isn't buy then chill. It's buy then build. Okay. With real estate, you're talking about what, like a 2% appreciation every year over some amount of time. With a business, it's like you can double that business in 24 months. Buy the right business. Buy the one that follows the 3 A's. Buy the one that you can build with your aptitude. Okay. And then grow it. That's how you make money in this. Okay. So stop trying to find that off-market deal so you can buy it cheap. Okay. Change your mind and say, I want to find, like, look, you if you change your mind and say, look, I want to find the strongest business that I can find and I'm prepared to pay a lot for it, typically you're a lot better off because you've de-risked it more than buying something that's shaky trying to save a penny, right? So in other words, look, I'm not going to go into the AE matrix right here because it's a tangent, but the point is you got to figure out what kind of business you're looking at, okay? And then, go into buying that company. So, number one, don't stress about finding that off-market deal. Brokers, M&A advisors, Sometimes they call themselves investment bankers incorrectly because investment bankers actually raise money and take companies public, different conversation. But any of these sort of, intermediaries, okay, when I talk to a seller, okay, or a potential seller, in a broker role or as a off-market role, you are talking about usually anywhere from 3 to 24 months to like educate them on the space, like why they're selling, not coaching on why they're selling, like they have to get into why they're selling. The number one reason off-market deals don't close is because the seller pulls out because they don't even know what they want. It's like walking up to someone's house and being like, "Hey, this is bold, but can I buy your house?" You're like, "Yeah, that sounds good. Like, what are you thinking?" And then you get into it, and then they're like, "Wait, I didn't even want to sell. I was just here minding my own business. Like, what is this?" So it's like you got to get the seller ready to go. So when the seller has fair expectations on what the market value of their business is, even when they're tweaked out a little bit, we want that as buyers, right? Because they are ready to close. Often there's even a list price. So when I'm talking to buyers and they're like, "Hey, Walker, like I found this company, I just want to know like what you think I should pay for it." And I'll say like, "Great. Hey, is there a list price on the business?" And they'll say like, "Yeah, it's right here. It says like $2 million." And I'm like, "Okay, how do you feel about $2 million?" They're literally telling you what they want for it. Right? It's like, let's just start with what's on the paper, right? And it's like, and then they're like, "Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I thought I kind of want to get it cheaper." This is always how it goes, right? And it's like, "Well, what's the valuation?" And it's like, "Oh, it's 3.5 times earnings." I'm like, "Okay, so you're looking at a business that's been around for 20 years and they're asking for 3.5 years of earnings, and you're going to amortize this over 10 years on a bank loan, put in a 10% cash infusion, and you're going to have like a 250% cash on cash return, and you're worried you're paying too much. What price are you thinking?" And they're like, "Oh, I really want to pay like a 3.2." And I'm like, "Great. That's like 4 months of earnings." Okay. Like, are you really going to let it go for that? So, like, I think like people, when they first start out, they're paying attention to all the wrong things, right? And they're trying to get a deal and all this other stuff. And it's important. I'm not saying completely throw it out the window. Like, just don't make a mistake. But I think that like if you work with these intermediaries, you get sellers that are at the table ready and willing to sell, which is like 80% of the game.
Who do
Okay.
you typically use, Walker, in terms of
Oh,
intermediaries, brokers? If we assume no
yeah.
knowledge here, if people are hearing
Yeah.
some of this
Mhm.
terminology for the first time,
Sure.
where do they look to find these intermediaries, these brokers?
Sure.
Any signposting you can do there?
Well, I mean, what I would tell you is, there's like every good answer in business, the answer is always it depends, right? But I think that like, if I'm in, Belfast and I want to buy a business in Belfast, I am going to identify the brokers in Belfast. That's step one. It's just that easy, right? Like, like in the United States, there's a website called Biz Buy Sell, okay? And it's like all the brokers, after they sort of do their initial round, they like put their stuff on there. Now, here's the thing. It's something like 40 to 70% of companies at market listed for sale don't actually sell. All right. And so if a business is on Biz Buy Sell, it's where it goes to die. All right. Like there's a lot, all the stuff that's never going to sell is there. And because we're all the average of the five people around us, every business listing is the average of the five listings around it. So it's a really good place to like get a glass of wine and just like have fun looking at stuff. Right. But here's the thing. I believe, and I was the keynote speaker at the California Association of Business Brokers 2 weeks ago. And what I told them was like, look, this statistic that these amount of companies aren't selling is a disgrace. It's because we, as brokers, are not spending enough time going deep into the business. I listed a business in my broker role for sale Monday last week. I spent 4 months with the seller. Okay. I did all this research. I spent money with my team doing additional research. We went to market today. Today we have 18 offers. What day is it? Tuesday.
That's
It's
incredible.
Tuesday. I came from a buyer seller call into this call, and I'm have another one right after. That's what we're doing. It's like I can't even. I'm telling 100 people to go away just because I took the time to really get in and understand the business. And I think a lot of times buyers. This is the other thing. They look at the SIM, the confidential information memorandum, the listing, and they'll be like, "Well, this looks like shit." Can I say that on this pot? This looks terrible. And it's like, yeah, it looks terrible because the broker that's unregulated industry. Okay. Like all their business model is like quote the seller the highest price and like get the listing and some percentage will sell, right? So it's like there's a very low bar to become a business broker of any kind. Okay. Like, and so the thing is I think that, when you look at a house, it's like, what's the square foot? What's the zip code? Like how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms? And like, I kind of already know what we're talking about. In business, it's like, the Sims get written up and you look at it and you're like, I'm not even sure this has a kitchen. Like, I don't know if that's an analogy, but it's like, I'm gonna buy a house with no kitchen. Like I can't figure that out. So, you just have to get into it. Now, here's the other thing. Brokers are great. However, we're also talking on this podcast to entrepreneurs that likely already own a business that are thinking about scaling. Okay. Great. Brokers are important, but the thing is there might be brokers in your industry, okay, that like are known or focus in your specific industry. Those are the ones that you want to find and meet. The other thing is go to all the conferences in your industry and start building a flywheel around acquisitions, right? And I think that if you can, emit confidence and speed at closing and actually get one or two or three under your belt, people will start coming to you at the same time that they're going to that broker in your industry because they know that you're the one that's building a reputation for like, look, all I need is these three numbers and then I buy your company or whatever it is, right? And if you can build a growth through acquisition strategy that's that effective, okay, like it gets to the point in time where, you'll be at one of these conferences and I'm going to go the other way here. Someone will be like, "Oh man, business is so hard, isn't it?" And you're like, "Here, let's go get a pint. How bad is it? How bad is it? Tell me everything." And what are you doing? You're buying the business right there, right? That's how that's going to go down. So it's, um so I think that specifically if you're in a specific industry, I do think that, doing some, and you have a longer horizon, okay, I think that doing that proprietary off-market outreach is worthwhile. Just understand it's extremely inefficient, it's extremely time consuming, and it's way more emotional than anyone realizes.
You've mentioned something there just in terms of, somebody has communicated that they're no longer enjoying the business. So there's a strong signal that actually, if the right offer came along, they might offload this burden that they
Yes.
currently consider. What
Mhm.
other things might we look out for in terms of selling signals?
Signals.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think that, there's this, like what's lovingly referred to as the country club number, right? Which is like anyone who sells their business, they're driving around the golf cart with their buddy and they're like, oh man, I just sold for like a 24 times, whatever. And you're like, well, okay, maybe, but, um, uh, look, like I sold a business. I represented the transaction. Okay. And it was two brothers and it was about $24 million. Dollars. They each rolled 10% equity into the deal, into the private equity company. About 20% was, um, you know, uh, a split between an earnout and a seller note. Okay. So that left 60% of the business that was, and then I think that there was another 10% that was hung up in inventory, so it was sort of delayed out over there was payments for the next 24 months, which left about, 50%. And then so that was 12 million. It got paid to two people, so that's 6 million each. And then after taxes, they basically had $3 million. But that's great. I want three. Raise your hand if you want 3 million. But like they also could have just gone to a country club and be like, I just sold my business for like $24 million. And the difference between 24 and 3 is a lot, right? So the point is there's a lot of people that get this sort of bad information out there, okay? And so you're asking about signals, and if people are like, "Yeah, I want to sell," and they just heard that story, it's not a real signal, is what I'm trying to get to. Okay, I think the big like, look, Brandon, the single largest signal that they want to sell their business is they've hired a business broker or an M&A advisor to help them exit the most valuable thing they own, which is their company. There's no other big flashing light than bigger than that. I think that, in the AE matrix and buy then build, there's sort of like four categories, right? And so it's all about understanding what you're looking at. And, there's what I call the platform business, which is sort of like what you can use your strengths to grow. then on the other end, there's sort of like the turnaround, right? And that's the sort of like, hey, it's fallen on hard times. But it's one of these where I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs can look at any business with like 10 million in revenue and be like, I'm confused. How is it losing money? Right? Like what's going on? Like, and all it takes is some operational chops to be able to like clean up the earnings, right? And as long as you're not catching a falling knife, right? It can be, a good space to be. And I think that even in turnarounds, it really is the only place in business acquisition where you make money when you buy. You got to be careful. But the other components are, is it one of these like eternally profitable businesses like corporate window washing, or something that like 10 years from now there are buildings with windows that need to get washed, like, or is it like a high growth company where, it's all, fueled by, 2023 artificial intelligence, and by 2025 the whole thing's going to break because of whatever's coming around the corner, right? So like you have to kind of understand what you're looking at. And I think that looking at the DNA of the opportunity will also help you read into the signals that the seller has. If I can maybe thread that. Does that land okay?
It absolutely does.
All right, great.
And I'm conscious of your hard stop. There's so much in this. We'll have to get you back, Walker,
Great.
for a
Yeah.
part two on this because there's so much value in all of this. Um,
We have to
couple
do it
of
at 5 p.m. Central Time so I can bring a Guinness. It'll be the after hours edition.
and me, that would be a good podcast. Look forward to that one. The trends, where are you getting, or what industries are you getting excited about?
Ah,
Given the fact that you're motivated as an
yeah.
acquisition entrepreneur.
Um, you know, Brendan, I wish I had a better answer for that. I like one of the this like whenever I go to a conference, someone is always cornering me, trying to be like, yeah, but what really should I buy? And I don't have a good answer for that. I think that there's just too many opportunities out there, and I think I would be misleading your audience if I try to pin the tail on the donkey on this question. I think that what I'm paying attention to, so number one, I'm going bigger, right? Like I'm actually barbelling, right? So the last five offers I made were, I think it was 23 million, 175 million, 70,000, and 30,000, right? So it's like I'm like I've gone completely the other way. And of course the 30 and the 70 I bought, and the other ones are like, well, so one of them was owned by a private equity company that's publicly traded, so they couldn't accept my offer anyway. But there was interest. But anyway, so I've kind of been barbelling, and I think that, you know, when I'm looking at businesses now, I think for those, like, I think acquisition entrepreneurship and buy then build is really great for people getting started that need like to get out of, the world as it exists, get out of the matrix and start living like the best life and getting into the corner office. Not the best life, the most engaged life. I got to be careful. It's full court press, right? But the thing is, once you get in the game, it's sort of like any other career. Like you can't necessarily skip ahead to the future. Like you can't start a video game on level 9 if you've never played before. You have to start at the beginning, right? And so I think that yes, you're now in the right game, but over time it evolves. And so, if I were to buy companies right now, which I'm trying to sell some, so if any of your listeners want to buy a company, come buy mine. I'll throw my shirt in. It's for sale too. But it's one of these where what I'm looking at are going to be things that have seven figures at a minimum in bottom line earnings, right? The other thing I'm looking for is these smaller acquisitions where things that I can, tack on to businesses I already have, right? And it's in both cases they're internet based and software based assets that I can plug into things to accelerate what I'm already doing, right? So I hope this is a decent non-answer,
It's a great
you know?
answer. Actually,
Okay.
let's say your non-answer is a wonderful answer because you haven't just thrown out there, yes, you should be buying something in artificial intelligence, or, so your answer speaks volumes to me in terms of how you approach this and how
Thanks.
our listeners should approach this, and not just kind of jump on the
Well,
latest trends
Well, let me
with.
give you an example that I can't help is popping in my head. Like, so I'm at this conference and this guy in the acquisition lab is like, "All right, Walker, we're doing it now. Like what is the business?" And I'm like, "I don't know, smoke screen." And then he catches me, and he's like, "All right, Walker, like I got you a drink." I'm like, smoke screen. I sit down for lunch the next day. He sits down next to me. He's like, "All right, we're doing like I need to know. What are we doing?" I'm like, "Okay." His name's Eric. I'm like, "Okay, look, I've had this idea. I haven't had time to look at it, but I'm really excited about it." He's like, "Oh, go on." He's like filling up my sparkling water. And I'm like, I'm really into boat marinas right now. Like it's more of a real estate play than a business acquisition. But the thing is like I feel like, it's fragmented industry, like you can scale it pretty quickly. Like you could buy multiple. So it's more of a real estate type play, than like a true business, like in the building operations play. And he went out and worked on this for like 4 weeks and then came back and was like, "You're not gonna believe it. I met like the biggest private equity people in this space." And I'm like, "There's private equity in this space?" And he's like, "Yeah, there's like 3 guys. Like I'm having lunch with the guy." And then like he found out that like 80% of all boat marinas in the United States that are worth buying are already acquired. And I'm like, "Great." So there's a perfect example of why I'm not going to give you an answer because I have an idea in my head, but someone's going to listen to this and run out and buy it, and then we're going to figure out that they bought the wrong thing.
I
I'm looking for
appreciate.
Irish companies. I want good Irish companies.
There are plenty, my friend. We have to get you across this way. There are
Great.
plenty. Let's move into a kind of soft close. I mentioned at the outset the influences which you have dotted all around the book, which is very odd. And as I say, a hardcore business book on acquisitions. Napoleon Hill, Bruce Lee, Wayne Dyer.
Victor
Where where
Hugo.
where does all of this come from, and
Oh man.
why is it shaping? Why does it even feature in a book that is focused on supporting entrepreneurs to acquire companies?
I believe that the book opens with a quote by Victor Hugo, which is something along the lines of like no army can withstand the power or the strength of an idea whose time has come. And what I'm trying to say here is like the let's move on. Bruce Lee, what's the quote from Bruce Lee? It's like to hell with what is it? To hell with
Oh,
statistics. I create opportunities. Like I'm
that's
just like can I drop an F bomb? I'm just effing
yes,
going at
yes,
it. I'm just
yeah,
effing going at it. So I'm trying to harness the things that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
yeah. I
Like
love that.
I wrote this book a long time ago, but it's probably, but like the thing is like, yeah, I think that a lot of us look throughout history to the people that have become famous for a reason. And I think that when we hear Bruce Lee say, "To hell with circumstances, I create opportunities," it basically summarizes the whole next chapter in like a single sentence. And it personifies it, right, in a way that this was my first book. This was my first book. It took me 4.5 years to write it. It took me 10 years to live it before I even started. And it's just one of these where it was like, okay, how can we sort of land the spirit, of this idea that I'm trying to talk about in this next chapter, right? And so I didn't put quotes on every chapter. I think there's only 4 quotes in the book, and it's very specific on what's about to happen.
Well, I think that's a beautiful segue into the close. That wonderful quote from Wayne Dyer, and I often say that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And what we're advocating here, folks, is that you start to look at the potential of acquisitions in a different way. You start to perceive or look at your scaling ambition and how you will reach the destination which you defined currently in a different way. And this will require you to begin examining your mindset where things like, that's maybe not for me, or a large number of acquisitions don't work out, or we don't have
Hmm.
the competencies or strengths. So already potentially some limiting beliefs in there before you even get out of the blocks. So I love it. I appeal to our listeners to go out and get a copy of this. We will link further reference material in the show notes. Walker, you you just deliver this, what can be quite grindy, in a really refreshing, energetic way. I'm confident that, given the fact that we now are back to startup mode, we scaled a business to over 9 figures in revenue, to almost 700 people across the globe, and now we're back to 13. So, can you wrap up by sharing with our listeners 3 timeless takeaways?
Oh my God. You're gonna give that to me with like I've got another call in like 30 seconds. Three timeless takeaways. Look, um, be an entrepreneur or don't make any money. Number two is innovation is equally as important as acquisition. Okay. Or I should say it the other way. Acquisition is equally as important as innovation. And three would be I think that you know, just find I just implore everybody on this planet to find, what it is they're good at. And I think that by doing that, everything else kind of falls into place, you know?
Brilliant. Right bang on time. Walker, I want to thank you for the incredible energy you've brought to
Brendan,
this
thank you
conversation
so much.
today. You're so, so
Yeah.
welcome. If people want to connect with you and find out a little bit more, where best to reach you?
Yeah. Buythenbuild.com. I've got a YouTube channel, Walker Deibel. WalkerDeibel.com. Join my newsletter. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's a good place to hit me up.
Brilliant. Well, look, I wish you every success in both buying and selling your businesses. Walker, it's been an absolute pleasure today. I look forward to staying in touch. Take care.
Pleasure's mine, mate.